Hello everybody, it's the Dirty J here, welcoming you to my new complete training guide. This guide does not feature specific levels, classes, or maps, but rather gives players the tools to train as fast as possible no matter where they are or what changes get made to the game. Because this video is longer than a typical guide for Yugen Saga, I have broke it down into chapters at the bottom of the video and in the description so that you can more easily go through and look at the topics that you might have questions on. So let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be the most obvious part of this guide for most people, but I felt it would be the best place to start. At the end of the day, everything in this guide is going to boil down to the fact that how much damage you deal per second is the deciding factor into how much experience you earn. So it's actually going to be better to think about your training sessions and how to maximize your damage per second instead of just thinking about experience per hour. In my opinion, there are three main things that together affect this more than anything. The first is the experience to HP ratio of the monsters you are killing. Next, we have the damage of your spells and your attacks. And the third thing is going to be your herd/mob management. The people that get the fastest experience per hour are going to be those who balance these three things the best. So first, let's look at the experience to HP ratio of different monsters and why that even matters. Here we have the stats of 4 different monsters of varying levels. As you can see in the top left, the level 6 cow has about 1,000 hit points and gives 40 experience. You do a little math and it means that for every point of damage you deal, you gain 0.03 experience. Now if we look at the top right, the level 19 hog has about 7,000 hit points and gives 580 experience, which equates to 0.08 experience per hit points. This trend continues throughout the entire game, where the experience to HP ratio of monsters increases steadily the higher level the monster. The non-nerdy way to package this information is that it is almost always worth it to be killing monsters in the highest map you can with only a few exceptions, as each point of damage you deal nets more experience. Now let's get a little bit weird with it and imagine a scenario in which the cow and the hog are the 2 strongest monsters in the game. Yeah, the game would probably be pretty boring, but that's not what we're going to be looking at here. Let's just say that you deal exactly 1,068 damage per hit no matter what. This would be a 100% efficient way to kill cows because every hit that you deal does its exact amount of HP, killing the monster, but losing no extra damage. It would take 7 hits with this damage to kill a hog, and you would lose some damage on your 7th swing as it would overkill the monster. However, in this scenario, you would kill 7 cows in 7 swings, getting 280 experience, or kill 1 hog in 7 swings, gaining 580 experience. This is obviously going to be better, given that 580 is bigger than 280, and we're not even factoring in the fact that it's going to be easier to hit one enemy 7 times in a row than it's ever going to be to hit 7 different enemies after finding them and hitting them exactly off cooldown. Now that we know to try and kill the strongest monsters available, let's move on to the second point of the DPS Triangle, the damage of your spells and attacks. It's pretty intuitive to see that the damage of your spells and your attacks directly affect your total damage per second, but there's also a lot more that goes into that than just casting your spell and dealing damage. Let's first look at a quick way to increase the damage of your strikes and basic attacks. If you didn't already know, the direction an enemy is looking changes how much damage you deal to them. So if you hit an enemy from the side, it deals 25% bonus damage as opposed to hitting an enemy looking directly at you. And hitting an enemy in the back deals 50% bonus damage. This screenshot shows my damage after hitting an enemy straight on, from the side, and then lastly in the back. As you can see, my melee damage while the enemy faced me was 2,833. When I hit them from the side, it did 3,740 damage, and lastly, when I hit them in the back, it did 4,529 damage. This can be harder to benefit from when you are training by yourself, but if you're training with somebody else, always try to keep an eye out for when you can be hitting a monster in the back just to get some extra damage in. Next, we are going to be looking at area of effect spells. AoEs can be very powerful in Yugen Saga, but there are some weird things that happen with their damage that some people don't understand. In this screenshot, you can see that I cast the spell Tempest Inferno 4 separate times. The first time I hit one enemy for 27.5 million damage. The second time I hit 2 enemies for 23.1 million damage for a total of 46.2 million. The third time I hit 3 enemies for 19 million each, but 57 million total. And the last time I hit 9 enemies for 13.2 million each, but 118.8 million total damage. As you can see, it is generally best to hit as many enemies as possible with an AoE, even though the damage goes down for each individual monster because it adds up to a larger total. Knowing how much damage each of your spells can do and the way that they work is also an important part of maximizing your damage. You want to avoid using your highest damaging attacks on monsters with only a small amount of HP and use lower damaging attacks to finish them off. In the clip that we are about to watch, I have 4 spells I'm going to be using in it. The first one is my largest area of effect spell that does less damage but has a damage over time effect. The second is purely a higher damage single target. The third is an AoE that only hits the 8 tiles around the tile it is cast on but has a low cooldown. And the fourth is one that chains from enemy to enemy through the herd. The first thing that you're going to see in this clip is that I'm currently targeted on a monster on the edge of the herd with a lot of hit points left. But because I'm about to use my large radius AoE attack, I want to move my target as close to the middle of the herd as possible to maximize how many enemies I hit. Next, I have my single target spell up, and I retarget a mob that doesn't have very much HP. A better play would have been to use my higher damage spell on a higher HP enemy so as not to overkill the mob and lose out of some of the DPS from my single target spell. When that mob dies, I now have 2 spells up. My small AoE with a low cooldown that you can see me casting in this still frame, and the one that chains through the herd. Because there is a maximum distance that Chain Lightning can jump, I target a monster on one side of the herd to increase the likelihood that it's going to jump the maximum amount of times. I then retarget to one with slightly more HP and use my single target to get as close to dead as possible, while finishing the last 2 mobs off with my low cooldown AoE spell. If you couldn't guess, my personal opinion is that you should always try and sell your experience in a way that tries to maximize your DPS. If you are a caster class, you want to be maximizing your mana regen, max mana, and your spell multiplier. And if you are a melee class, you want to be maximizing your hit point regen, your max hit points, and your melee multiplier. That being said, if you are dead or walking back to a map to train, then you aren't able to deal any damage, and low damage is better than no damage. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, but if you feel like you are dying quite often, then I suggest buying hit points or stamina to stay alive. A constant flow of experience is going to be more efficient than having to walk back constantly. If you are a fresh level 50 character, you will find that your new, more powerful spells not only take a flat amount of mana, but also a percentage of your current mana, which can make them difficult to cast repeatedly. Because of this, I highly suggest almost every class to spend the majority, if not all, of their experience immediately into Wisdom until you can afford to cast your level 50 spells immediately off cooldown. Like most things in life, there are different ways to do things, but there is always a give and take to your choices. The level 50 damaging spells increase in damage based on your current HP or your current MP, depending on which spell or attack you are using. Some players like to go for a higher max mana or max hit point build so that their initial attack and max hit are as high as possible. But I personally prefer to build with a lower max hit and a higher regen rate to give more sustained damage. Here you can see that I regen 21% of my max mana per tick, which allows me to cast my spells pretty consistently while dealing good damage. I suggest you make your chat box transparent when training by clicking the small dialog bubble in the bottom left to allow you to click to target on a larger percentage of your screen and increase the visibility in the bottom corner of your map. To add to this, once you are comfortable playing your class and intuitively feel the timings of your spells without having to look at your spell bar, I also suggest that you go into the settings panel and hide the show action bar under the interface section. This not only gives more space to click to target and increased visibility like hiding your chat dialog box, but also ensures that you don't accidentally misclick a spell that you weren't ready to cast yet, putting it on cooldown. Now it's time to talk about the third point of the DPS Triangle, herd and mob management. I think this is one of the most overlooked parts of training in Yugen Saga, while also possibly being the most important part. Remember, it doesn't matter how much damage you can do if you don't have mobs in front of you ready to be hit. If you want to train quickly, then you need to understand one thing. You should be moving almost constantly. Movement during training can be broken down into 4 distinct categories: getting closer to a currently aggroed monster to damage it, moving towards a new section of the map with monsters that are currently not aggroed to you, grouping enemies closer together to deal more AoE damage, and avoiding damage. The first thing you should do when you enter into a map that is new to you is explore it and learn how the whole thing connects together. Pay special attention to different choke points such as hallways, doors, and dead ends so that when you are training in a map you don't put yourself in a position that you have to immediately backtrack through an area where you just killed all of the monsters in. Ideally, you want to work in some sort of circular motion, going from spot to spot in a map where new mobs are waiting for you, as maps are typically broken down into smaller parts where sections of monsters respawn consistently. Static spawn monsters, like the mushrooms on these bridges, will always spawn in the same spot on the map and don't move. This not only means that they are easy to hurt if you know where they spawn, but that they can also be good indicators of which sections of the map have started to respawn and lead you towards other mobs that might be wandering nearby. As you start to deal more damage relative to the monsters you are killing, you will need to start carving out a bigger area of the map to repopulate your herd, as the monsters will die faster but continue to have the same respawn time between kills. While you should have a general idea of the direction you want to head in the map, you should also be watching the edges of your screen to be able to pre-select your next target while killing your current one in order to minimize downtime between one kill and the next. Instead of walking directly to every single mob to kill it, use any low cooldown or low cost range spells available to your class to pull them towards you instead. This allows you to pull mobs from the different edges of your screen at once while still dealing damage to the monsters close to you. When positioning yourself around the herd, try to move in a way that gets close enough to mobs to aggro them without needing to cast any spells so that you can focus your damage on the already damaged monsters. While this helps replenish your herd, it will also thin it out faster as your damage is spread out slightly less so that your herd does not get too big for you to handle. Big herds equals big experience, but only if you are able to continue casting your spells or using your attacks off cooldowns. Do not sacrifice your damage just to have more mobs at one time. In fact, it is possible to have a herd that is too big. Not only will this mean that you won't be able to deal as much damage as more of your focus will have to go towards dodging hits or maintaining your crowd density. When this happens, monsters on the edge of your screen might get too far away and lose aggro on you, which will make you lose all the damage you did to it as it heals up, and it will reduce your effective DPS. While in a group, it can be an effective strategy to split up to different parts of the map to grab monsters and bring them in closer together. If you do this, make sure to damage the monsters while you are hurting them instead of just waiting for the group to get back together so that the herd dies faster while both players are on the same screen. When using this strategy, you should always have party arrows on, and also the include distance box should be checked so that you don't waste time trying to find your group again and can make sure that you are herding in similar directions. One of the most common mistakes I see players make during group play is to try and get too big of herds between each meetup. NPC Pathing is pretty intuitive in Yugen Saga. The farther a monster is in one direction in relation to your character increases its odds in moving the opposite direction towards you. So if an aggroed monster is 10 tiles above you and 3 tiles to your left, you can pretty much assume that it's going to be moving down to get closer before it moves to the right. This leaves 2 main ways to keep your herd as close together as possible. The first is to walk in a tight circle around the herd so that no mob can be pulled too far in any one direction. And the second is to continuously move in 2 opposite directions as much as possible so that the monsters straggling behind have more time to move closer to the monsters at the front of the herd, which should be moving back and forth with your character. Because different NPCs can have different move speeds, you can get into situations like this, where the different mob types sort of split out into 2 separate groups. I recommend trying to walk the faster NPCs back into the slower NPCs when possible, as it will cause them to try and move around the slower NPC, which also lowers their effective move speed and groups them back together. While this video has only shown Mystic gameplay, any class can utilize these tactics while training to increase their DPS and experience per hour. So remember, the 3 things to focus on are always trying to kill the highest level monster available, maximizing the amount of damage output possible from your spells and attacks, and managing your herd properly. If you made it all the way through the video, then I sincerely thank you, and I hope that something in here will help you get better at Yugen Saga. And if you like content like this, please let me know and I will continue to try to make more like it. See you next time.